Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining me for tonight's episode of Beyond the Ballot. I'm Brady Meyer. It's great to have you all with me tonight. Now, before we dive in today, I just want to take a moment and recognize, first of all, that it's our 20th episode of Beyond the Ballot, if you can believe it. Let's go ahead and start this early milestone episode off with some headlines in politics from DC to the UP, starting in Washington, where leaders in the federal government may be edging closer to a temporary deal aimed at ending the war in Iran. A source familiar with the matter says negotiators are discussing a plan to declare an end to the conflict in the country and launch a 30-day window to resolve other sticking points. A one-page memorandum on the plan reportedly includes a long-term pause on uranium enrichment and would require Iran to ship out its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. President Donald Trump says his top priority is reopening the Strait of Hormuz and finding a diplomatic off-ramp to the conflict, but the White House remains cautious after previous negotiations collapsed at the last minute. Well, a U.S. congressman from Michigan recently introduced legislation that would limit U.S. involvement in Iran to 90 days. The new measure by Congressman Tom Barrett would authorize but also restrict President Trump's military actions in Iran. That military action began on March 2nd, starting the 60-day clock before the president would have to get permission from Congress to continue the war. On May 1st, the White House announced the use of force had ended, but military operations are still ongoing. Barrett says his new bill is designed to define the exact mission of the conflict, set a deadline, and prevent American boots from touching the ground.
The authorization will allow the president to continue the blockade for the next 90 days and also allow for the safe navigation of the Straits of Hormuz, but not the use of ground troops and not an endless conflict that'll take another 20 years and another generation of Americans to go fight.
The bill would also require the president to report to Congress every 30 days, detailing operations, legal justifications, and casualty numbers. Back on April 20th, the Economic Club of Marquette County hosted a guest speaker, someone who we here at TV6 and possibly you at home may recognize, someone very familiar with covering the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. John Decker reports from the White House for Gray TV and iHeartRadio with 3 decades of coverage of administrations from Clinton through today. Decker was also elected to the White House Correspondents Association Board in 2015, is an adjunct professor and a longtime member of the Washington Press Corps.
What I want to convey to people is what it's like for me to cover the president, and I have some institutional background because I've covered the White House since 1995, since Bill Clinton was president of the United States. So I can make these comparisons about what was it like.
Before he made that trip to the Econ Club, John Decker stopped in here at the station. And that brings me to today because myself and the rest of the TV6 team had the chance to ask him some questions about what it's like covering the White House, specifically this administration. Now, before he and I went and, after that, he and I went and recorded a sit-down interview for this show. Here it is. All right, so I've got John Decker with me, Washington White House correspondent. Great to have you with me here in the UP.
It's good to be with you, Brady. Thanks for having me.
So a big part of this show is to talk with our reporters and correspondents and learn more about the reporting process for them. You obviously have a very unique, I'm sure, reporting process in Washington, D.C. So I want to just ask, what does your reporting process look like, and what does a day in the life of a White House correspondent look like?
Well, it's a long day. Typically, my day begins, as far as reporting is concerned, about 7 a.m., and it ends around 7 p.m. And in between, I'm seeing what the president's schedule looks like, and also paying a lot of attention with President Trump, what he's putting out there on social media, because that often drives the news cycle. You know, what the president puts out there on Truth Social can push us in a direction that we did not anticipate at the very beginning of the day. So I do have to pay close attention to that. And fortunately, I'm in a position where I do get an opportunity pretty regularly to ask the president questions. And so when I have those opportunities, I'm always thinking, what are the viewers most interested in knowing about? What impacts their lives? Right now, what impacts their lives, a lot of it has to do with gas prices. So I've asked the president so many questions in regards to high gas prices. Sometimes he doesn't like those questions because it really is an Achilles heel for the administration right now. You know, I travel with the president so often, and before this war started, he used to, you know, as part of his talking points, Brady, he used to talk about how low gas prices are. And now he can't make that same type of statement. Now, of course, we see gas prices higher than they've been during the course of his presidency.
I'm interested to know, it could be about gas prices, it could be about anything, but when you're dealing with these very powerful leaders in Washington, it could be President Trump or Caroline Leavitt, and you are finding questions to ask, how do you balance making sure you're being firm and holding them accountable with not veering too far into angering them territory and making it so that they don't want to answer?
Well, I think that I've built a reputation where I'm seen as fair, which is a good reputation to have if you cover the White House like I have for so many different administrations. So I've covered Republicans like President Trump, I've covered Democrats, going all the way back to Bill Clinton. And the thing that all of those administrations recognize is that when they get a question from me, it's not going to be a gotcha question. It's going to be a question that informs the public, provides more clarity on a particular issue, and that's what I'm most concerned about. And in asking questions, I am tough often, but I'm fair, and I think that if you're good at your job, President Trump's good at his job in terms of answering questions. Caroline Leavitt is very good at answering questions. You're not going to get angered by a tough question. You can handle a tough question. If you can't, then you shouldn't be doing that. But she's, you know, one of the best of the press secretaries that I've worked with. I've worked with 17 White House press secretaries, a long period of time. So it says a lot, you know, when I tell you that she's right up there, you know, in terms of being one of the better ones. And I'm never concerned about, is this going to anger the president? I'm more concerned about providing information that's useful to the public.
You mentioned these relationships that you've been able to build. When we show your packages here on TV6 or even on a show like this on Beyond the Ballot, Caroline Leavitt will often address you by name. So clearly you have, you know, been able to build these relationships. How have you been able to do that? Where does it even start?
Well, as it relates to Caroline, the White House press secretary, she had a position in the first Trump administration, also in the press office, but in a much junior position. And I got to know her then. I treated her with respect, even though she was a low-level staffer. She appreciated that. And we continued on with that working relationship when President Trump wasn't president, when he was running for president, and now that she is the White House press secretary. So, you know, it's just a matter, like anything, you know, just making certain that there's a comfort level that people have when they know they're going to get questions from me. And I'm very adept at making people, I think, feel comfortable. Whether it's the President of the United States or whether it's a cabinet secretary or whether it's the White House press secretary.
Is that a common thing? Like, for example, with the Obama administration, were there people that you had worked with there and then maybe you didn't see them for 4 years because Trump was in office and then they returned when Biden was in office? Is that something that you see?
Oh, absolutely. That's a perfect example of that. There were individuals that worked for President Obama, like Jen Psaki, who came back and served under President Biden as his White House press secretary. Jen Psaki was the spokesperson for the State Department during the Obama years, so I got to know her then. So, you know, relationships matter for a lot in Washington, D.C. People may come and go from administrations, but if you keep up those relationships, it will pay off in the long term. And so I think that that is something that I learned a long time ago, and it is applied to people that work for both political parties.
Is that relationship, those relationships, the big thing that differentiates yourself when you're in the White House press pool and there's, I don't know, dozens of reporters and you get called on? Is that the basis of that, the relationship that you've been able to build?
It is, yeah. I think it's that, the reputation, the longevity, all of that comes into play. With President Trump, the first time I interviewed President Trump was actually a long time ago. It was in 1999, before he was even a politician, when he was just a developer in New York City. And the president recognizes that that was a fair interview. I think it was an hour-long interview that I did with him back in 1999. And, you know, I think I'm one of the very few people in the White House press corps that can claim, you know, that their relationship with the president goes back, you know, nearly 3 decades.
In the time that you've been covering the White House, the social media changes, I mean, just big picture that you think of, seeing Facebook start and seeing Twitter start, seeing President Trump get kicked off Twitter and start Truth Social, all these changes, how has that changed your job and what you do in Washington?
Well, it's changed it quite a bit, you know, and the reason being is because the President Trump is really taking advantage of this. He doesn't necessarily have to talk to those legacy media organizations that are the broadcast networks, NBC, ABC, CBS, the cable networks, CNN, Fox, MS Now, as it's called. He can go past them. He can talk directly to the American public, to the world for that matter, through Truth Social. And with the president, he recognizes that power that he has, and he takes advantage of that. He can move the news cycle simply by putting something out there on Truth Social. He does it often, and we do have to pay close attention to what he's putting out there on Truth Social. That gives us a window in terms of what he's thinking about any particular issue on any given day.
What are some of the other big picture changes that you've seen in your time in Washington besides social media?
Well, news organizations. So I've seen news organizations that, you know, once were considered to be legacy news organizations that really don't have an influence anymore. Newsweek magazine comes to mind. I mean, Newsweek magazine used to be right up there with Time. Now it's you know, a shell of what it once was. And I've also seen news organizations that during the past 2 decades that have started from scratch and are now very influential in terms of what they do. Politico is a perfect example of that. I think that began during President Obama's time in office. And it has influence in terms of putting stories out there. So it's the news organizations that, you know, cover the White House. And now with President Trump back in the White House for a second term, we see news organizations that would describe themselves as right of center that are covering this White House. I say the more the merrier, you know, in terms of covering the White House. And, you know, that's new. You know, a lot of these entities were not around covering President Joe Biden. I don't know if they'll be around if there's a Democratic president that replaces President Donald Trump. But they're here now, and they certainly have a lot of influence in terms of what they put out on a daily basis.
How are you able to just recall all of the different things that are going on in, you know, President Trump's world? Like an example I want to give is that this was a few months ago. You had reported on the Gordie Howe Bridge and some of the uncertainty that was going on with that, and President Trump wanting Canada to pay for some of that. That's kind of now been a dormant issue for a few months, but certainly we're ready for that to spring back up. I'm sure you are. How do you just keep all of these different topics in mind so that if tomorrow President Trump were to tweet about that, you'd be ready to cover it?
Well, I read a lot. I'm very much well aware of what the president is putting out there or has put out there on social media. I'm aware of stories that maybe not on the front page in Washington, D.C., but maybe on the front page in Michigan newspapers, for instance. And so I do pay a lot of attention to that. There have been instances where the one that you cited, I asked that question about the Gordie Howe Bridge. Canadian reporters who don't get called on that much in the White House briefing room were so thankful that I asked that particular question because it led their newscast. That's a very big deal. And I recognize that. And sometimes I'm one of those reporters that doesn't follow the crowd. You know, if I see everybody's just, going down the road of just asking question after question about the Jeffrey Epstein files, not that that's not an important issue, it is. I often decide, you know what, I'll let those reporters ask those questions. I want to ask questions on a different issue entirely. Still important and still relevant, and maybe even more relevant in terms of impacting so many people's lives around the country, more so than issues related to the Jeffrey Epstein files.
I have one last question I want to ask before we wrap this up, and I guess I just want to draw from my experience first to preface this. So when I had first started, this was 2022, and I was a week into my job, my first professional job in Green Bay, only a few months removed from college, and my station went and had me interview Governor Tony Evers. And then a week later, I was interviewing the senator. Well, I had interviewed, obviously, Tammy Baldwin, but in this case, it was Ron Johnson. And being that new to the field, it was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm interviewing these very powerful people, and you kind of just marvel at your job a little bit. Certainly, some time has passed, and it isn't quite that special, maybe, but you still, like even now, I interview Governor Whitmer, and it's like, that's amazing. Right. For you, you're interviewing President Trump. You might be in the White House or the Oval Office when Zelensky is there. These big, powerful people from all over the world. How often do you just kind of stop and marvel at your job, and then how do you balance that with still being able to, take yourself back a step and say, this is what's going on, let me just report on it as a reporter?
Well, it's a privilege that I have that I get to ask questions of the president almost on a daily basis. Last week, for instance, I asked 11 questions over 3 different days to the president, and that's great. I just am very appreciative of that. But I have to take advantage of those opportunities, and I can't, have this oh wow factor in asking a question to the president in the cabinet room, during a cabinet meeting, or in the Oval Office. I have to focus on my job and on the task at hand, and that's what I do. It's really remarkable to me. This is the remarkable thing, Brady. When I know I'm in the pool on a particular day, and I'm getting ready in the morning, like you get ready in the morning, and I know that there is an event on the president's schedule in which I will get an opportunity to ask the president a question. And I think as I get ready that morning, I'm going to ask the president a question. What am I going to ask him? And sometimes my question in my mind changes from what I thought in the morning. And it depends upon what the president said, maybe in response to a different question, or something that the president between the morning and the time of that event put out on social media. So I'm very much aware that the news cycle changes rapidly, and I have to respond to that. And I always want to ask a meaningful question, a relevant question, something that will make news. Not a gotcha question, but something that will help move the news cycle and give greater clarity to viewers. That's always my goal when I get those opportunities with the president.
All right. Well, John Decker, White House correspondent, it's been a pleasure to have you on and to hear a little bit about your process.
Thanks a lot, Brady. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
All right. Again, that was John Decker, our TV6 White House correspondent. It's great to have him on the show to talk about his experiences and what really separates him in an environment that journalists work a long time to move into. I was really excited to bring you that conversation. Hopefully all of you took something away from watching it. I just had a blast talking to John Decker and kind of picking his brain and just learning about what it is that he does and just all of that goes into being a White House correspondent. I just think it's fascinating as a journalist myself. So I really hope that you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed actually getting to talk to him. And I think with that, this is a great pivot point for Beyond the Ballot because, of course, John Decker was the first guest of mine to be on after the May election. The next election is the August primary. And that means that politics are really only going to be ramping up from here. More TV ads, more campaigning, more stories on our newscast about certain ballot measures and races that you'll be voting on come August and November. One race we're following is for our next Secretary of State. Our current Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, is term limited, leaving the door open for someone to succeed her. A few weeks back, the Democratic Party held their nomination convention, and the Republicans a few weeks before that, meaning we now know who from each party is going to be the nominee. I had a chance to sit down with each of them last week, and next Monday we're going to start our coverage of that race when I bring you my conversation with Republican nominee and Macomb County Clerk Anthony Forlini.
Been known across the state for our election integrity issues that we've done, things that we've done to clean up the rolls and things that we've done to clean up elections and make them more transparent.
Then on Wednesday, his opponent, current Lieutenant Governor and Democratic nominee Garland Gilchrist, joins me to talk about his campaign.
What I've heard from Michiganders is that, they need to be able to trust their voting process too. They're very worried about the threats that are coming against votes and voting and voters in Michigan from this Trump administration and his allies.
Well, it should be very interesting to break down where the two agree and disagree as far as the job and the future of our Secretary of State office here in Michigan. Again, that starts on Monday, May 11th. I hope to see you all there. In the meantime, if you have any thoughts on this episode of Beyond the Ballot or future episodes of Beyond the Ballot, you can reach out to me through the email on the bottom of your screen. I always enjoy hearing from you guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in. That's all for tonight. Have a great night and a wonderful weekend.